object that we are having, we will be able now to allow different ways of communication. So that is why we are saying, with this presentation of the objects that are able to communicate together, if program 5 is depending on program 3 and program 2, if you try to remove program 2, will it affect these? It will affect in two way or the other. So that's why we have either a positive or a negative effect. And when you have a positive effect, meaning that there are some attributes that were used here, which were supposed to be used here, of which now, because this one is a child of program 3, automatically it has created a good communication in that. So that's why we are saying construct executable by using forward and reverse engineering. So you can allow forward engineering or reverse engineering. You can allow this to communicate with this so that you can have this, or you can allow this communication with these two. Describe the organization, a relationship of the component. And when you're coming up with a system, because I know what you'll be developing at that point, you cannot develop registration system to be the last one to be accessed by the user. You, first of all, create a system that allows you to register. When you allow it to register, you can allow this person to book. Then after allowing you to book, then you can do another communication. So it allows you to organize some organizations on that. Another way that you can be able to define this is when you are looking at this communication, maybe we can say we are having a bank system. So this is a bank system. Maybe we can look at maybe this is a bank system. And within this bank system is able to do some different functions. Maybe we say this is a bank.java or any other file that we are having. So this is you break that. Maybe we have another system, and there is another component that is supposed to be presented, and this component is maybe the school.java. So the school is depending on the bank. So this arrow, we can change it to on the other side. Remember, we are using a dotted arrow. We must use a dotted arrow. So school is depending on a bank. Whatever has to be given to a bank, to a school, comes from a bank. Maybe the student pays fees. When you pay fee, automatically it reflects in the school system. And when it reflects in the school system, now the student, we claim that the student has already paid the school fees. So this becomes a component, and this becomes a component. So a way that we can be able to explain a component, it is a visualized object or a visualized system that allows you to maybe create an organization within the system or create a visualized object within the system. So that is now how you understand about this. But these component diagrams cannot work without deploying it. That's why we have a system in a bank, we have another one in school, but we must deploy. So when you deploy that, that is the case that we use what you call the deployment diagram. So you have developed a software A, and you have developed a software B. So the moment you develop a software A and you develop a software B, automatically you have to deploy that. Deployment is implementation, the use of this system. But when you are using it, you must know on how we can be able to implement it, because sometimes you can implement a system, but most of the components are not able to work within the organization. It's like we are having a system, but the system is not communicating. So if a system can communicate, now that system is done what you call, it is deployed. When a system or a component is communicating with another component, and this component is now utilized by the user, it has already been done what you call deployment. So before I go to deployment diagram, maybe you can ask some questions so that now we can implement these two systems that we have already created here. because we are looking at an aspect where I have created a software. By this software, we have created different components, but these different components, you must deploy them in the organization. So is there any question maybe that you can ask so that maybe we can deploy that system that we are having within an organization? So is there any question up to that point? Maybe somebody can ask a question, how we are supposed to implement the component diagram, maybe how we have understood about the component diagram. Maybe we can challenge ourselves, maybe to come up with a clear presentation of what we have understood about the component diagrams. Maybe you are doing your own system currently, but that system, you have different components. Maybe you have form 1, 2, 3, 4. Those 2, 4, or 3 forms, you will be able now to create them, and we create them to form a software. But what about now implementing it to be used? The way we implement it to be used is now what we are calling it deployment. Maybe we can have some questions from others. Is deployment diagram. So in this case, I want to use these notes maybe for first to explain what is deployment diagram. These are UML diagrams that show the modeling and packages of the component diagrams into what are known as nodes. Now, in this case, for when you are implementing a system, what do you require? One, you always require a device. So you require a device. And then the next thing that you need to require is what you call a processor. Then from that, you still require what you call some applications that you are supposed to have within that. If I look at an ATM system, in an ATM, we require some components. Maybe I require a keyboard. I require to implement a keyboard. I require to implement a printer. And maybe I require to implement, what else can I implement? Maybe I require a printer. Maybe I require a mouse so that I can implement that. So this becomes systems. These are devices that I need to use. But when I implement these devices are supposed to communicate. But when they are communicating, how are they communicating to the users? So that is what we need to look at. So within the deployment diagram, we can say the deployment diagram is the communication of a system. It's the system that is communicating, or what is called system engineering. So that's why we are saying deployment diagram model the location, the relationship between the nodes. So we are looking at node A and node B communicating to form a certain aspect. They therefore model the static deployment views of the architecture. They relate to component diagrams in that node encloses one or more components. Now, before we try to explain what it's maybe supposed to work within the system and maybe the advantages of that, let us first of all look at the requirements that we need to have within the system. And this requirement that we are supposed to have within the system, we need to look at now the diagrams, or maybe we need to look at now the nodes that we can use. So when you're coming up with the UML diagram, the deployment diagram, we need to have a node. And this node is always presented like that. I think I'll be able to present to you using the notes that I have. So this one, you can have node 1. But this node is relating with another node. So this node is relating with another node. So that is the diagram that we are supposed to use for a node. So this is node 2. So meaning the first one can be a processor. The first one can be a processor, and the next one can be what you call maybe a device. It can be a device. And when you talk about a device, you're talking about mouse, keyboard, etc. But the moment you talk about the processor is used to execute the jobs that are coming from the device. So when I request a service, I request a service from the device. So in this case, I still require what you call a database. So I require a database as a node. And this is the one that will be pulling some information from the database. You take it to the node. Maybe you take it for a certain application that you are supposed to have within that. Then we can display it using a device. Within here, I still require some programs or processes. I require some application. Let me call them applications. And this application, when you are presenting application in a deployment diagram, we always use this kind of a diagram. So we present this is a program, or this is an application. So it can be an app, or it can be a program. And when you talk about a program, we are talking about jar file. It can be an executable file. Maybe it can be a document file and many other files that we are having, which are still presented within the component diagram. So this application is able to perform some aspects, maybe 1, 2, or 3. Let us look at this presentation that we have here. What are the advantages? We are saying, 1, it improves performance, it improves scalability, maintainability, portability, etc. And what we have here is the relation. So we are having a deployment of a cell, then warehouse. Maybe we can move it to the next page. We see whether we can see those arrows that are represented. So these are the arrows. This is the arrow that is pointing to that. And this is the arrow that is pointing to this. And this is the arrow that is pointing to the whole of that. So for this case, we are saying the cell is a node and a warehouse is another node. Now, when you look at the cells, what are we supposed to do with the cells? This is just a system that does sales, a system that does warehousing. But now, when you talk about this system that does sales, within it, there must be a processor. There must be an application that is supposed to be within it. So we are only looking at the whole system. We are looking at the whole system. When you go to the warehouse, we have another application that is supposed to be done on that. Maybe there is some component that has created on that, and many other things that we have on there. So in this case, we need a server as another node that will allow you to pull some information that the sales system will be able to work with, that the warehouse system will be able to work with. So in this case, we can try to understand the possibility of this system having to work with a different system together. So that is why we need to understand that when you are using the deployment diagram, it allows you to create portability, because we can allow to move sales, we can allow you to move warehousing, we can allow you to move a server in a given aspect. And within that, that's why we need to understand. Let me maybe come up with a very clear presentation of what we can expect within this. Maybe if I have a system And I want to use a package diagram because there is a package diagram. So this one, I can call it ATM system. I can call it ATM. So within the ATM, we can form a component diagram. So we can form a deployment diagram. So we form a deployment diagram. And within this deployment diagram, maybe we can have some other component. And one of the components that you can have in it, allow me to use a very small diagrams on that. Maybe we can have order, not order, registration, or maybe we can have maybe password. Just a minute. So for this now, I want maybe to have something like maybe password. So this is now the system. This is a component that allows you to enter a password. So when you enter a password, maybe you can have another one that you are supposed to have here, within here. So in this case, the whole of this component, we can say this is maybe a keyboard. You enter a password, maybe you accept, or maybe you click OK. So there is that method that is used for creating a click intervention or action. So when I click, I'm using a keyboard to click that. So when I'm doing another aspect, I'm using a keyboard. So you can look at now all the possibilities of our functions that are now done by a keyboard. So in this case, when I am entering a password, I'm using a keyboard. When I'm clicking, I'm using a keyboard. So those ones can form what you call a subsystems, or can form what you call a component. But this now forms what you call a deployment diagram. Then you can look at now this diagram communicating with a server. So I can call it a server. So this server, now you can form another deployment diagram. So this server, when it is communicating with when a component is communicating, when a deployment diagram is communicating with another one, now you form this as an artifact. So there is a relation that is called an artifact relation, because a server cannot communicate if these objects are not able to get the information. So meaning we are pulling this password, maybe I enter maybe Nicholas, or I enter Moravi. So that is the password that has to be pulled from the server. So when you pull that information from the server, that is the time that now you can have another maybe another artifact that you call maybe a monitor. So you can have a monitor. So this monitor is able to relate with this. So you can have a relationship. So there is a relationship between this, and there is a relationship between these. So this monitor, I think you can see that. So this monitor is able to relate with the keyboard, because this one we said it is the keyboard. It is the keyboard. So the keyboard is able to relate to the monitor, because when I pull the password, automatically when I key in some information, now it is displayed on a monitor. So in that aspect, we are saying we are creating another artifact. We are creating another artifact. But if we are having a component, maybe this one is relating with another component that is inside it. So if this component is relating with this component, because a component can relate with another component, we form what you call a manifest. We form what you call a manifestation. So there is a manifestation between component A and component B, meaning that this data will not be displayed if the monitor itself cannot allow the display of that. Maybe we have a screen that is not working. On the other one, we have already triggered, we have clicked OK, but now it is not triggering that aspect. So if it is not triggering that aspect, so automatically we cannot allow the communication. So what we can say about this, don't cram this. What we are looking at is, we are looking at what you call the three-tier communication. And when you look at the three-tier communication, we are looking at where we have created a system, we have created some component, maybe under.java. Now, the whole of that, we call it deployment. Then we need to communicate with a server. Remember now, this server, we are sending, uploading some music, maybe downloading something. We are communicating with the server. So if this server is communicating with my internal system, now that becomes an artifact. But if now, inside it, maybe we are having some order, or maybe we are having library system, maybe we are having lending books, and maybe we are having registration. If registration and reading books, because those are two components that we are having, now that forms what you call manifestations. So if now the whole system can be able to communicate and be able to interact with that, we can say we have deployed a system. We have deployed a system in the use. So that is what we are supposed to understand on that. And that's why we are saying, if you look at what we have here, we are saying it allows what you call maintainability. You cannot create a system that you cannot maintain. It allows portability, movement of system from one point to another. It allows performance, scalability, improvement of that system. And that is what we need to understand about the relation. So there is something that I have introduced here, and I have tried to introduce what you call a package. Anything that is enclosing components, anything that is enclosing deployments, anything that is enclosing everything, it forms what you call a package. So a package is a collection of other components, or a collection of components, or a collection of objects that you bring them together, to be used. So that is what I'm expecting for you to understand for now. If you are using these diagrams, so I'm expecting I want to give you a good interpretation of your system. And I will post it in your portal, that I want you to go to your system that you are doing currently, that you want to present, because you will be presenting your system. I want you to go to that system that you'll be presenting, and you tell me maybe how we can be able to create a component diagrams, how you can be able to create a deployment diagrams, how you can be able to relate those diagrams that we have. So that's why I want to give you 2 minutes, maybe to try to analyze what we have already covered, and then you ask a question from that. So I'm waiting for a question. Maybe you can use an SMS, you can use a mic maybe to communicate or that. If there is no question, maybe you can tell me there are no questions. Maybe starting with Doreen. Maybe the first one that I have here in my register, I have Abraham, sorry. Anna, I have Doreen, Evans. Maybe you can tell me whether you are understanding what I'm communicating. If you're not understanding, I can still repeat. So I have a response from Evans. So can I have another response? So have you understood? Others, maybe you're not responding. So I'm waiting for your response. So I have only one response from Evans Kimani. And maybe Evans, you can tell me whether I'm supposed to repeat from deployment diagrams or from the component diagrams. Okay, I have for Doreen from deployment. Maybe Evans, can you tell me whether you are okay with the deployment or maybe I start from component? So I think I can start from the component. You majority have already saying that they have not understood. And I want first of all to clarify that you understand the component in other fields, but when you talk about component in this communication, when you're using the UML diagrams, mostly what comes in our mind is visualization and the relationship that is on a system. And when you talk about a system, I think the best way to explain about this is when we are having your own system that you are creating. I know maybe some of you have created maybe library management system, and if I'm your supervisor and you have created a library management system and you have never seen me, I have to reject it. So it's better maybe to see your supervisor if you have been given your supervisor. So for this case, if you are looking at now the system, and I'm looking at now library management system, in this case, we are looking at different things that are done on that library system. Maybe to mention few, we have registration. As a student, we must register. As a staff, we must register. Then from there, maybe you can do what you call borrowing books. There are those that are doing ordering. Maybe the managers are ordering books from different levels of communication or from different publishers. So in this case, that's why we are saying a component will create that visualization, because if the system that is created in a certain organization, like now the library management system, if we cannot communicate, maybe the borrowing and ordering cannot communicate, automatically that is not a good system. Because in our case, we need to understand that we must order books that are relevant to the institution, that are good or used to the institution. So if you're ordering books that are not asked by the student, automatically we now incur a lot of cost, which automatically will not be able to lead to a lesser way of minimizing cost. So that is why we are saying we need to look at now that communication. And that is now the case where we are saying in a component diagrams, we are looking at now how are these systems able to communicate with each other. And that's why I've already presented this. And maybe I can use this kind of a presentation or this platform. And I think you can see this platform that we have here. If you can't see, maybe you can tell me you can't see. Can you see that platform? Can you see the platform, please? Maybe one. Okay. So we are looking at now, the first thing that you should be able to have is the diagram or the symbols. And we said most of the symbols that we are supposed to use, we use, I said this is a curved, it should be curved. It should be curved. It is because now we are using scripting. Then I have said we must use a component. So we are saying this component given to a certain system. So when you understand about component in other units, we understand that correction of other representations that are able to communicate to achieve a certain objective. So we are looking at different way of understanding this component. Because when you talk about the first one, maybe borrowing, allow me to use that. This borrowing can be an application. And that's why we have said the component can be a file. It can either be a dynamic link library. It can either be an applet. And this applet is the one that maybe you say maybe .php, maybe .js, that is JavaScript, and many others that we have as an applet or applets. When you talk about files, you are talking about .doc file, .executable file, maybe .dll. These DLL files are mostly used on a system files. They are the ones that allows the execution of a certain file within the operating system. So within this, we are talking about file and we call it .java. Then this one must communicate with another component. And that's why I have not drawn maybe the component, the arrow where it is pointing to, because in this case, I don't know where it is supposed to be pointing to. It must be given out by the method that we are having. So in this case, we can have another component, which might be a document file, which might be an executable file. And this one, we can call it maybe registration. Now, this registration, we are calling it .java because it is an executable file, or we can call it .exe. So it means borrowing books depend from the registration. So our arrow point to that. So borrowing book uses registration if we are giving out the relationship or the association. So in this case, we are saying the first component that is able to communicate with the registration. That means if we have not registered, we cannot borrow books. So in this case, that's why we are saying visualization. They are able to visualize. They are able to create some communication on a given system. And if they are able to create a communication on a given system, that means borrowing and registration must communicate. So in this case, we can say we are providing an interface for this. So we are providing a clear interface. And when you provide these two interfaces, they must be executable, or they must be used by the user. So the user has to use maybe a keyboard, has to use a mouse, has to use everything that we are supposed to use as a device. But for this case, we cannot use it because we have not deployed the system. So we have already created a system, but how will this system communicate? So the moment the system is communicating, that is the point that we are saying we need to do what you call deployment. So we can understand that for a system, we are just creating for a component, we are just creating a software. But when you create this software must communicate. When it is communicating by user through a mouse, it is communicating through a monitor, it is communicating through the use of a keyboard and many other things that you should be able to use in communication. That's why I have gone directly to what you call deployment, because I want to use this system in an organization. So you deploy. So the moment you are deploying, what are we supposed to use in communication? So the first thing we have said, this is when the system is able to communicate, or a node is able to communicate to another node. So in this case, we have introduced a node. We have introduced a node where this node can either be a device, or this node can either be a processor. So this node can be either a device or a processor. Remember, a processor is a hardware. So in this case, we are talking about hardwares. We are talking about hardwares. Looking at a point where we need now to send some information from hardware A to a hardware B. But when you are trying to send some information, there must be a smooth communication. And this smooth communication is where the system is able to give me what I am supposed to give, to be given. The system is able to display whatever it's supposed to display. That is what we are looking at that point. And within this, we have said the symbols to use is this symbol. And I think you'll bear with me the diagram that I have already presented. So we present something like that. So inside it, you write whatever we want to deploy. And within this case, I'm saying we can use a processor here. A processor here, and within here, then we can have a device here. So for this case, we can now have a communication. But this communication is now communicating from the processor to the device. Now, that is why I've said, maybe when I'm using a processor, maybe I'm using an ATM system. So within this ATM system, what can we do with the ATM system? And that's why I've said, if you are using an ATM system, I have already introduced a package. And this package, we can say we have an ATM processing. So within this ATM, we can have a component, a deployment diagram. We can have a deployment diagram. And this deployment diagram, we can have maybe a keyboard as a device. Maybe we can have another one. Maybe we can have a monitor. We can have a monitor. So in this case, inside it, we can do other operations. And that's why we are saying inside it, we can have a component. And this component, we can call it borrow. We can call it borrow. But for this case, because we are now using an ATM, here we can say maybe password, enter password. Maybe we can have another one within that. Maybe for this case, when you're displaying, maybe we can have a component. Maybe we do what you call balance. Dot maybe Java. Password.java. So this is just an explanation. So please, when you're coming up with your own system, you'll be having a real information. But for this case, it must communicate with a server. So a server now becomes another deployment diagram. So here we have a server. Remember, a server is a system. Keyboard is another system because this is now a function that is creating it. And this is another one. But this becomes an application. And that's why I have said, when you're using component diagram, what you need to have is files. Maybe .executable file, but here we need something like a device. For this one, maybe we need a processor. This is where we have a processor inside it, because it's the one that is now allowing you to process some jobs. And we have said we need now to communicate to the server. And when you're communicating to this, we have said these are what you call artifacts. But when a system, a component is communicating with another component, when a component, maybe this component is communicating with another component, there's what you call a manifest, or what you call manifestation. So in this case, we can say, when I use a key in some information, we are keying in using a keyboard. When a keyboard accepts, it is now pulled from the database, whether it is the right password. Then when it is pulled from the database, whether it is the right password, now automatically it is displayed on the keyboard. So you are displaying either barang, you are displaying either credentials that are not accepted or credential either accepted on that. So that forms what you call the flow of execution, or the flow of the system in the execution, or the cycle. So in this case, we can say, when you are using the deployment diagram, we use what you call a cycle. We must use what you call a cycle in communication. And that's why we are saying, when you are coming up with your own system, we can have everything that is supposed to be used in that communication, and everything that is supposed to be used in that communication, now you present either as a component, or you present it as a deployment, because now you are using that kapat, because that kapat password, it is like a software. This borrowing barangs, displaying barangs.java, it is another software. But now you are displaying it on a monitor, you are displaying it on a keyboard, you are displaying it on a mouse, etc. All these are supposed to be used in the communication. So in this case, we can say deployment holds or create a group of various components. And that's why we are saying it is mostly used for creating communication on a system. I hope I have answered your question. Maybe you have somehow understood that concept that we have already talked about in the deployment and in the component diagram. Maybe if you have an answer, a question, maybe you can ask. Pauline, are you okay now? Evans, are you okay? Doreen, are you okay? Anybody with a question up to that point? Because I don't want to extend this lesson. I want you, first of all, to understand those two diagrams. Then after understanding two diagrams, next thing, we'll be able to do packages, and the next topic that we will complete with is what you call software implementations in an organization. Software implementation in an organization. Then after that, you do a recap of what we have covered on those diagrams, and then that will be our end of our syllabus that we are supposed to cover in this semester. So I'm expecting maybe from 20th, we will have completed the syllabus, and maybe we start revision for the end term exam. So is there any question? Any question? Yes. Can we move? I want us to move to the chat room so that we can answer some questions that we post them on your portal. Then after that, maybe we can create some chat rooms so that we can communicate on that. So remember next week, maybe from next week, we are supposed to be doing assignments. So I'll be able to send an assignment that you are supposed to do. And the assignment will be from these topics that you have already covered. Mostly it will be on UML diagrams. And I'm suspecting that maybe you try to look at that. I'll give you an assignment concerning your system that you are doing currently. So are you doing proposal? Have you presented proposal? Have you started proposals? When are you supposed to start proposals? Hey, my friend, I think you are supposed to do your proposal this time. Don't have any reasonable doubt that you are supposed to do your proposal right now. Who is your supervisor? Does that mean that you are not supposed to do proposal right now? When are you supposed to start your proposals? Please, can you assist me so that I can understand? So you are supposed to do it on May. And now we are in July. Remember that you are supposed to present. Now, Richard, please, can you assist me in understanding this? Have you been given supervisors for your projects? Please, and allow me to understand that, please. Who is now the supervisor? Who is now the coordinator of your project? Do you know them? I think there is miscommunication. And I will follow that. I will follow that. Because you are supposed to do your presentations. You are supposed to do your proposal right now. You are supposed to be given your supervisors. Right now, you are supposed to have your supervisors that you are supposed to use in order to present your proposals. That's why you are doing this unit, so that the moment you'll be doing your end term, the final project, you'll be able to use these diagrams, or you'll be able to implement these diagrams. And I remember the last class that I was having, they had already started the moment you are in these diagrams. So that's why I'm wondering, but I will follow up who is your coordinator for your project, because I don't know currently. I know it was Mr. Bet, but Mr. Bet went. Mr. Bet is not around. So whoever was supposed to continue with that, I don't know. I will follow up with that. So for that now, I want to pose at that point, not telling you that you'll do your presentation, because I want to set a presentation that you can have a presentation. One time we have a group of 3 where each and everyone can present, or maybe each and everyone can present. I don't mind, even if we take 2 weeks, or even if I create classes that you can present your proposals. You can present your project using the following diagrams. But for now, let me rest at that point. So for this case, I will follow up and I will come back to you. Maybe I'll send a message to your WhatsApp, maybe when I get information, because I know that you are supposed to present your proposals. And if I'm not wrong, if I can go back to the message that I have already seen, maybe I have seen that you are supposed to. Have you seen any message on presentations? I don't know whether it is you. Let me confirm. Just a minute, I confirm. So I think I have seen a WhatsApp message. So you are in year 2, Sem 1. Richard, are you in year 2, Sem 1? Okay, so I have seen a message here. And I will read that message the way it is. Year 2, Sem 1 proposal. Dear student, there shall be a presentation for proposal and project for January, April 2020. Oh, that is for January 2020. I'm sorry for that. Maybe that is miscommunication. So that one is for January 2020. And because you are supposed to do your proposal right now, please, can you follow up with the FedEx well? Because they are supposed to give you supervisors for the current intake that we have. Please, please. Do you know do you have the phone number for FedEx well? So please follow up with that. That he is supposed to give you supervisor so that you can start your proposal early enough. So the moment you will be presenting, you will be somewhere that you can present your proposals, because you are supposed to present it this semester. If I'm not wrong. Okay, Paulina, you are writing something? So, Paulina, I think I'm not the one who was adding a student in OSAD group. I can see Narasha. Narasha is the group admin. Please follow up with Narasha. Is the group admin. Please follow up with Narasha. Yeah, I think I have. So Narasha, you can and Pauline. We will communicate after this class, please. So any question up to that point? So I think what we have covered is about interpretation of the component diagrams, why we should be able to use a component diagram. So if you look at maybe the notes that we have, I've already given the presentation of these component diagrams, mostly usually mapped to one or more classes. So it's like we are presenting a class or a corroboration of interfaces that we have. And if you can look at what we have already tackled here, we can see when I talk about maybe order, password, maybe borrowing, that is just an interface that has already been provided. When you are creating your system, maybe you create a system called A, but it has B and C. See, these are subsystems of this whole system. So this one we can call it deployment. This one we can call it subsystems, which are now the component diagrams. And those ones are the ones that we have already presented in our scenarios. So if there is no question, I want to end at that point, and then you give me 5 minutes. There is a quiz that I will give to you on a portal so that you can respond to it. Then after that, we can have a chat room. Immediately you complete. So don't move from this portal. We still have a class, still have 2 hours that we are supposed to continue, maybe with our class. So please, can we move to the chat room so that we can do that quiz? So I can get some answers for that. Can you? Yes? Yes, Richard, okay. So I think we can move to the chat room, and the next topic will be on packages. So if you look at, I have not given you notes on packages. I will still add other notes according to the component diagrams and the deployment diagrams. There are some notes that I have added here that were not there. So I will still add them. Then after that, we will go to development process of a software. So the moment you want to develop a software, which are these steps that you are supposed to follow? This is the theoretical part. And that one will mark the end of our topics that we are supposed to cover this semester. And then we can start our thorough revision in this unit so that we can be able to make sure that we understand. Remember that your exam is supposed to be on August. So at least we have 1 month, not supposed to start maybe from 20th of August. So you have 1 month maybe to prepare yourself and maybe to complete the syllabus. So let us meet in the chat room. And thanks for listening.